Hello everyone! Today I wanted to share with you about this book that I am reading that I am super duper excited about. It is The Chemistry of Essential Oils Made Simple by David Steward, Ph.D, D.N.M, and the subtitle is God's Love Manifest in Molecules. I love this book so much. As you can see, this is a huge book. It is like 700-ish pages long, and it's like very scientific. You learn all about, as you can tell from the title, the chemistry of essential oils. You learn all about hydrocarbons, oxygenated hydrocarbons and their isomers, and chiral pairs. I am super duper liking this book, you guys. I want to tell you a little bit about it. Okay, first of all, the first chapter is kind of like about, chapter 1, Review and Critique of Resource Literature. Before I even mention that, on the page that immediately precedes the first page of chapter 1, this is a diagram of this is the structural formula for a molecule of ambretolide, which is hibiscus seed oil. I think that's awesome. Okay, so without further ado, chapter 1, as I said, is a review and critique of resource literature. So that's another really awesome thing about this book, is that this author has, once again, I've mentioned this before in previous videos about other books that are similar, but this book goes above and beyond even having a really good bibliography by, as you can tell from the title of chapter 1, actually describing in detail what all these other books are like, with the value that's in them and a critique of them as well. So I love that. And from this, I am going to be buying other books by these other authors that this author has described in this book. So I am very excited about that as well. Okay. Also, this chapter 1 talks about the 4 ways to take oils, which are through the lungs, through the skin, through the digestive tract, and through the absorbent tissues of our body orifices, which that one is not really talked about as much. Just in general, I mean. Okay, then it talks about the 3 schools of aromatherapy. So the German school, the English school, and the French school. Okay, the German school emphasizes inhalation as the best way to receive the benefits of essential oils. Inhalation puts oil molecules directly into the bloodstream through the alveoli of the lungs, as well directly to the brain through the olfactory nerves which connect to the central brain. I want to mention this book also describes that and explains how the molecules of essential oils are all smaller than 500 AMU, and most of them are smaller than 300 AMU. And because of the size of them, their small size, and the way that they vibrate, they can pass through the skin and into the bloodstream, and they pass through the blood-brain barrier as well. So that's important to note. And that's also why we can inhale them, and they go into our lungs and through the bloodstream that way as well. Okay. The German school emphasizes inhalation. The English school of aromatherapy emphasizes massage with neutral carrier oils containing 2 to 5% essential oils as the best practice, according to them, of aromatherapy. In the English school, skin is the primary organ of absorption for essential oils applied diluted in low concentrations. And then the French school. The French school is the one that I most agree with, and that actually the research and the literature really supports the most as well. The French emphasize taking essential oils orally, but in practice they utilize all 4 methods of administration, including oils applied neat, undiluted on the skin. Okay, so also some of the authors that are listed right here in this introductory kind of section about the French School of Aromatherapy are D. Gary Young, N.D., Terry Friedman, M.D., medical doctor of the United States, Kurt Schnaubelt, Ph.D. of Germany, and Daniel Penuel, M.D. of France, another medical doctor. I am so thankful for sources like that, and let's see, I want to mention also this book talks about some of the tests and that are kind of not very valid when they are done. So for example, this book explains how each essential oil is comprised of hundreds of different compounds, such as limonene. That's an example of one compound. There are hundreds of different compounds, beneficial compounds in every essential oil. Compounds that can be analyzed with machines like the GCMS, gas chromatology mass spectrometer. Okay, that's one of the machines that is used to analyze essential oil components and stuff. Okay, so some of these tests and research studies will take one of those compounds in isolation and a lot of it and like administer that to someone, and that will come up with with bad results, with like bad effects. And then the people that have done that study will conclude that therefore, since this oil contains that compound, that oil is bad for you. So this author explains how when instead you use the actual oil as a whole without just taking one of the compounds out of it and using that compound in isolation, the other compounds that are in the oil, they all work together in harmony, and they have quenching effects. They actually take that compound, which could be harmful by itself, and they change it into either something neutral or something that's actually beneficial for the body. And so it's really awesome about that. And that is one thing to look out for. And especially, unfortunately, like the British School of Aromatherapy adheres to that invalid research of just taking that one compound and using large amounts of it and then concluding that therefore any oil that contains that one compound is bad. Another way that tests are and research studies can be kind of invalid is when they test things on animals, because animals, for one thing, are so much smaller than humans, and the substances will affect animals in very differently than they will affect humans. So that's another way that those tests can't really be trusted. Okay, so whereas a lot of these doctors, such as Terry Friedman, medical doctor, and others who have actually tested have been using the whole oils in their practice on humans, have seen very good results with those. Okay, I want to mention that. Moving on. This book has such really neat information. Okay, so this book also has a chapter of just kind of like a refresher about chemistry. It starts with an atom and how an atom is composed of like protons and neutrons in the nucleus of an atom, and then how the electrons move around them. Okay, so an atom is composed of electrons, protons, and neutrons. Okay, and so it then talks about hydrogen being the lightest atom. This book talks about the periodic table and why it's organized the way that it is. Talks about the weights of all these different elements. Talks about how the weight of an electron is so much tinier than the weight of a proton or a neutron that the weight of an electron is not really factored into the weight of the element. Talks about isotopes and what isotopes are, which is very important. Talks about molecular formulas of compounds and of molecules. Okay, this book talks about the 27 elements needed by the human body, and then they describe the author of this book describes what those elements do and how if we have too much of certain of these elements, such as nickel, iron, zinc, copper, if we have too much of it, it can be really toxic for us. But if we don't have any of them, that is really bad for us also. So we need them in trace amounts, and we need the right amount of it. So I think that was an important point. Okay. Talks about the families in the periodic table. Talks about why it's called the periodic table, because certain characteristics are periodic. They repeat the certain characteristics of the elements. Okay, moving on. I'm trying to get to these things that I think are really interesting and really important. Okay, thank you so much for staying with me, guys. Okay, I thought that this part was really interesting also. This part talked about how even trace compounds that exist in essential oils in very tiny amounts, how even though this compound, C10H18S, which is also 1,p-menthenate-thiol, it's also known as thioterpineol. It is the distinctive fragrance of grapefruit oil. It occurs in a tiny trace amount, less than 1 part per billion. 1 part per billion is equivalent to 5 drops in an Olympic swimming pool. Okay, yet, even though it occurs in such small amounts in grapefruit oil, its presence dominates the scent of grapefruit. Amazing as it seems, one molecule in a billion of the sulfur compound, which is that compound that I have been talking about, in grapefruit is so strong that it overcomes the D-limonene, D-limonene is the main component of grapefruit oil, as well as it's found in other citrus oils as well, and is easily picked up and distinguished by our sensitive noses, even though it exists in such a tiny trace amount. I think that's amazing. Okay, there's other super amazing stuff that I'm skipping just because this book is so big and I really don't want to make this long or boring. I just want to kind of show you what I love about this book. Okay, this is when it gets into kind of the diagrams of molecules, and he explains it really well. I think he talks about the valence of different elements and how some elements like to give up or take electrons, and how like compounds and molecules are formed. This talks about hydrocarbons and how this one right here with 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens is the smallest and simplest hydrocarbon. Okay, because carbon has a valence of 4 and hydrogen has a valence of 1, and that's why it is 4 hydrogens to 1 carbon atom. And this book also talks about ions and radicals, which is when instead of this balanced like situation here, if there were only 3 hydrogens for this 1 carbon, then it would be kind of unbalanced and it would become an ion/radical. And this author talks about what is that particular name of that and what it does. It likes to attach itself to other things. Okay, I want to mention this part. When does natural mean natural? So this author describes how when scientists can reproduce a compound that exists in nature, but make it in a lab synthetically, they are allowed to label that natural. Okay, so here's the quote from this book. The U.S. federal government permits the word natural to be used on a label if the product consists of compounds that can be produced by nature, even though the content of that particular product may have been produced entirely in a chemical factory. This is an important thing to realize. It's actually a lot cheaper for these companies to synthesize things in their chemical factories or their labs than it is for them to actually grow the plants lovingly and carefully and use the actual plants. Because when you grow the plants, you don't really have complete control over all the factors. You don't have control over the weather. You can water them as needed, but what if a huge storm comes and wipes out your whole crop? Then you're kind of up a creek. And there are other factors as well. So it's actually people have more control, companies have more control over synthesized products. They're able to have control over the whole situation. So it's really is cheaper and easier for companies to make things that are not actually from nature, to synthesize stuff. And that is just an important thing to realize. Okay, also, this book describes how an essential oil is allowed to be labeled 100% pure, even if only 5 to 10% of what's in that bottle is actually from a plant, a growing, living plant. And the rest can be filler or who knows. And it is allowed to be labeled 100% pure. That is another really important thing to realize. That's why it's really important to know the company from which you're buying your essential oils. This book also talks about how why you need actual real essential oils that are actually really from plants, that don't have just these compounds removed from the plants and put into this mixture, but instead how the oil is extracted from the plant, usually through steam distillation. Other ways that essential oils are taken out of plants is by cold pressing, or another word for it is expression. Also by liquid distillation, that's for resins, and some essential oils. And by the way, cold expression and cold pressing, those are not technically essential oils. They're technically called expressions or essences. And also they can sometimes contain molecules that are larger than most essential oil molecules, but are still good and beneficial and therapeutic. Okay, that's another thing. And then there are some plants such as jasmine and onica, and there was one more that I'm kind of forgetting. I think it's neroli. Those plants are in such a way that steam distillation or cold pressing won't get those therapeutic compounds out of those plants, those specific therapeutic compounds. So instead, an absolute is made or is used, and that's when you use a really good quality alcohol to extract those therapeutic compounds from that plant. And then the result is called an absolute, which is technically not an essential oil, but it's like very similar. Okay. Next. Okay, this part is really, really cool. This part kind of explains isomers. The isomers of a given formula can I'm trying to find first the definition of an isomer so that I can just tell you guys. Alright, so basically you have a formula such as this. C3H8O stands for 3 carbon atoms, 8 hydrogen atoms, and 1 oxygen atom all together in a molecule. Okay, that is isopropyl alcohol. Okay, this is an example of an isomer. All right, so notice the formula is C3H8O. And notice the structure of isopropyl alcohol. Look at this group right here, this oxygen, this OH group. I think it's called a hydroxyl group. I could be wrong. It does say it in the book. Sometimes I forget. Okay. It's in the middle of the molecule, basically. This is isopropyl alcohol. I'm going to go to the previous page. Look at this. Propanol, C3H8O. It has the same formula, the same molecular formula, the same number of carbon atoms, the same number of hydrogen atoms, the same number of oxygen atoms. It's also called propyl alcohol, but look at this OH group. It is on the end and it's not in the middle. So therefore, propyl alcohol and isopropyl alcohol are isomers. They have the same molecular formula but a different structure. And that's very important because it changes the way that it changes the properties of that substance. So something with two isomers that have the same chemical formula can have vastly different properties. They can do different things to our bodies, and it's important that we realize that. And this book does explain things. I might not be able to find an example exactly. Okay. The isomers of a given formula can differ so much that they don't even belong to the same chemical families, as in the example of butanol and ether. So that's a different example of two different things that this author did describe. Okay. This is a crucial point in understanding essential oils, and especially in understanding the differences between natural compounds and synthetic ones. Nature produces only certain isomers, which in laboratories often cannot be produced. That's another really important thing to realize. Laboratories may be able to produce something with the same chemical formula as something that's found in nature, so an isomer of something that's found in nature. But if it has a different structure, it is not going to be beneficial for us. And they may try their hardest to make it have the same structure, but they often cannot. So that's an important thing to realize. Okay, this talks about the shorthand for these different kinds of molecules, all these alkanes. Okay, and it explains how you can realize what all these zigzags mean, where the carbon atoms are and where the hydrogen atoms are. Okay, this part I thought was really neat on this page. This kind of tells us the larger the molecule, the more atoms it contains, and the more possibilities exist for isomers. So it's telling us, think of it as if they're Legos. Let's say you have a room full of people, and you give each person 3 blue Legos, 5 yellow Legos, and 8 red Legos. And you tell them, make something with those Legos. No two people are going to come up with the exact same thing, unless they're like looking and cheating. Okay, so in this simple example of only 16 Legos in 3 colors, 16 Legos, 3 different colors, there are an unbelievable number of possibilities. 20,922,789,888,000 to be exact. That is more than 20 trillion different possibilities. So if it was a molecule, that is 20 trillion different isomers possibilities from that same formula. Isn't that amazing? Okay. Okay, this chapter here talks about aromatic rings. This is the benzene ring. How many compounds in essential oils contain a benzene ring, and so sometimes the benzene ring is also called an aromatic ring. Okay. And how in these rings, okay, so look at this diagram here. You see the double lines in some places, and in some places just a single line. So those double lines are showing the double bond, and how since electrons are constantly moving, and in a ring like this, they are moving around the whole molecule. They don't just stay with their atom, they move around the whole molecule. So you don't really know where an electron is at any specific moment in time, since it's so tiny and it moves so fast, and it's always moving. So therefore, you don't really know where these double bonds are in the molecule at any given moment. So sometimes the benzene ring is drawn like this to kind of show that these electrons could be anywhere and these double bonds could be anywhere. All right, so from this, we learn about resonance energy and why that's important. I like this book that this author references here, Transcendental Physics by Edward R. Close, Ph.D. He mentions string theory and quantum mechanics, which I think is awesome as well to be mentioned here. I am going to wrap this up because this video is already very long. And this is only page 178. There are like 600 more pages that are awesome with new information. So thank you. Once again, this book is titled The Chemistry of Essential Oils Made Simple. This book also talks about exactly how plants make essential oils. I think he gives an example of one compound that's in one of the oils, and he talks about how it's made from this other compound. It's pretty awesome. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day.